This war is unsustainable in the way that Afghanistan was unsustainable for the Soviet Union, and noting that probably at this point in time, Russia has in the first, whatever it is, 15 months of this war, taken maybe 8 times or more the battlefield losses that the Soviet Union took in a decade in Afghanistan. The Ukrainian offensive that is going to come, that we expect once the ground dries, and apparently it's wet again right now in some of the areas, so it could come maybe the end of May would be my guess, early June. Again, if it's very, very dry, maybe a bit sooner. We're going to see 9 additional Ukrainian brigades, 2,500 to 3,500 soldiers in each, with Western tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other weapons systems, not on the front lines right now, that have all been trained at training centers in Germany, the US training centers, UK, Eastern Poland, Ukraine, and they will achieve combined arms effects for the first time.
The former U.S. Army officer and retired General David Petraeus predicts that Ukraine will launch an offensive by the end of this month or early next month, and that will require the Russian forces to withdraw to prepare defenses. The Ukrainian forces will likely achieve combined arms effects, which could be terrifying for the Russian troops. Petraeus believes that Russia's losses in this war have surpassed the battlefield losses they experienced in Afghanistan during the Soviet Union era. The military expert states that Putin's position is mutually exclusive with that of Ukraine, and as such, there can be no serious negotiations at this point in time. To bring the conflict to an end, there would need to be several steps before a negotiated resolution could become attractive. He believes that it is incumbent upon Ukraine, with the support of the US, NATO, and other Western allies, to demonstrate to Putin that Russia cannot suffer the Ukrainian and other Western forces. Petraeus states that the Russian forces are not well trained and not well equipped to withstand what the Ukrainian troops will throw at them. However, he does not see Ukraine taking back Crimea in the near future. To bring about a negotiated resolution, there would need to be several steps, such as the tightening of the personal, economic, and financial sanctions, export controls, and possibly a US-led security guarantee coalition of the willing. Petraeus is of the view that a Marshall-like reconstruction plan would also be required, which would ideally use the $300 billion of Russian reserves frozen in Western institutions. The former general states that the US would have to be the real broker in such negotiations, as it would be responsible for providing the major incentives and guarantees. If this does not happen, there is a risk of a frozen conflict with new front lines and continued fighting across it. Listen what David Petraeus has to say on it.
First of all, I don't think that the conditions are all right now. Neither Russia nor Ukraine is willing to seriously negotiate. Their opening positions are completely mutually exclusive. Doesn't matter who it is that tries to broker this deal. There may come a point in time where a combination of the US and China, and actually many other countries, could create conditions that might make a negotiated resolution attractive. But I think there have to be several steps that take place before that. Keep in mind that as it stands right now, Vladimir Putin, despite the failures, the loss in the Battle of Kyiv, Sumy, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Kherson, and so forth, and failure to achieve their winter offensive goals, despite all of that, Putin still seems to think that Russia is going to be able to outsuffer the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and the Americans. And so it's incumbent, frankly, on Ukraine, with our extraordinary support, $35 billion in arms material and weapon systems already, along with our NATO allies and other Western partners, to show Putin that not only will he not be able to outsuffer the Ukrainians and the others, we're going to see 9 additional Ukrainian brigades, 2,500 to 3,500 soldiers in each, with Western tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, and other weapons systems, not on the front lines right now, that have all been trained at training centers in Germany, the US training centers, UK, Eastern Poland, Ukraine, and they will achieve combined arms effects for the first time. Other tanks supported by infantry, air defense, engineers, mortars and artillery, electronic warfare, good command and control. And if you do that, this is terrifying to the enemy. We did do this during the fight to Baghdad. It's what collapsed the forces that stood up to us, especially the Republican Guards ones, and then even the besieged militia, or the Saddam Fedayeen, like the besieged militia, frankly, irregular forces. And they're going to, I think, take back liberate a lot of the territory in the south and southeast that Russia took early on in this war. I don't see them taking back Crimea just yet, but the question is, do the Russian forces crumble just locally or more broadly? I don't think they're going to be able to defend against the Ukrainians. They're going to have to withdraw from their current positions under fire to the prepared defenses, which are behind the Russian forces. In the southeast, it's largely a single line. In the south, it's multiple lines. That's the most difficult imaginable maneuver. And these are forces that did not train as units. The Russians now, these units have been ground down and replacements have just been pumped into them who are not well trained, not well equipped. And I don't think they're going to be able to withstand what the Ukrainians are going to throw at them, having not been able to achieve, again, their objectives despite human wave attacks against the Ukrainians throughout the winter. Now, if that happens, then maybe you start to set the conditions where Putin realizes, together with the tightening of the personal, economic, and financial sanctions and export controls on Russia and the Russian economy, that maybe he needs to figure out how to get out of this. Now maybe you can get into some real negotiation. And on the Ukrainian side, you have President Zelensky, who obviously has to want this bloodshed to stop, not just on the front lines, but in the civilian communities are being hammered on a nightly basis by Russian missiles and Iranian drones, and the prospect of a Marshall-like reconstruction plan, which they desperately need, ideally using the $300 billion of Russian reserves frozen in Western institutions, which Larry Summers has, I think, very coherently laid out a legal way to do, and a security guarantee, which is most important of all, and that should come from the U.S.-led, ideally path to NATO membership. But in the interim, there's going to have to be some kind of U.S.-led security guarantee, coalition of the willing. You put all that together, those are the incentives for the Ukrainian side, those are the incentives for the Russian side. And now, again, I don't care who brokers this. You could involve China in it. It will take, at the end of the day, the real broker is going to be the U.S. because, again, the big numbers here, the big guarantees here will come from the U.S., not from China. But that's how it may end. Now, you could also have, though, just another frozen conflict with new front lines, with continued fighting across it. You could have a complete collapse of the Russian forces and even take back Crimea, take back all of the Ukrainian territory seized since 2014. That's not my base case, but I don't think it's impossible. So these are the scenarios, I think. These are the factors on which this will depend. Most importantly, really, how poorly do the Russians do in the face of what I think will be pretty impressive, and the first time we'll see true combined arms operations and effects. And that's a pretty big deal. And then the question will be, if it continues, will the Europeans and the Americans continue to support this? And can the Ukrainians continue to generate additional forces, noting that their population is less than 40 million and the Russians are 140 million, although the Russians have had a hemorrhaging, not just of talent, but also of military-age males.